The worst thing about the moment he left me wasn't the dust cloud kicked up by the tires, or the sheer, brutal silence of the empty highway. It was the feeling that I hadn't just been abandoned, I had been deleted. It started like all our worst moments did, with a low, tight simmer that finally boiled over into a sharp, ugly exchange. Mark and I had been driving for 8 hours, heading toward his sister's house in Arizona for a family emergency. A long, tedious drive through scrubland and endless, shimmering asphalt. Mark was always difficult on long drives. The close quarters seemed to amplify every frustration, turning his mild impatience into cold, controlled fury. We had been married for 19 years, and I knew that tone better than my own name, the low, clipped words, the white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. The fight began over something ridiculous, something trivial that only masked the years of deeper resentment. He was annoyed because I had asked him to pull over for a bathroom break 2 hours after our last stop. "Can't you just hold it, Sarah? We're already behind schedule," he snapped, his voice tight. "I can't, Mark, and we are only behind because you spent an hour arguing with the cashier about the gas pump. We need to stop now, please." That was enough. My request, my simple human need, was interpreted as a declaration of war. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, the sound dull and shocking in the small space of the truck cabin. "You are unbelievable," he hissed, eyes fixed straight ahead. "Always demanding, always slowing things down. You know what? If you have to stop so badly, fine, get out." I laughed, a short, nervous puff of air. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark, just pull over safely." He didn't pull over safely. He swerved violently onto the gravel shoulder, slamming on the brakes. The air filled with the stench of hot rubber and roadside dust. He didn't even put the truck in park. He turned, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw something truly terrifying in his eyes, pure, unadulterated contempt. "I mean it, Sarah. Get out. I am sick of the complaints. I am sick of the drama. Get out of my truck. Figure it out yourself." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mark, this is the middle of nowhere. I don't have my phone. I don't have my purse. You wouldn't." He reached across me, unlocked my door, and shoved it open. "I would. You know where you can stick your attitude. Do whatever you want. I'm leaving." He reached under the seat, grabbed my small canvas travel bag, the one with my medication and a spare shirt, and tossed it out onto the shoulder. He gave me one final, icy look that erased 19 years of history, shifted the truck into drive, and floored the gas pedal. I watched, numb and disbelieving, as the truck roared away, the red brake lights shrinking rapidly into the shimmering heat haze. The dust cloud settled, leaving me standing alone beside a sign that read, State Route 68, no services for 50 miles. I was 52 years old. I was wearing an old, thin t-shirt and jeans. I had maybe $10 in my pocket for emergency gas money, and my phone was dead in the canvas bag. My husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, had left me stranded, disposable on the side of a highway. The silence that followed was immense. It was the deepest, coldest silence I had ever known. I sat down on my canvas bag, forcing my breathing to slow, and began to absorb the reality. This wasn't just a fight, this was a statement. Mark had finally shown me who he truly was. I was a burden, a complication, easily discarded. Our life before this highway moment had been the picture of comfortable stability. Mark was a regional manager for a mid-sized construction firm, and I ran a successful small graphic design business from our home. We lived in a quiet suburban town, our 2 children grown and established. Our house was always warm, always filled with the comforting smell of coffee and freshly cut grass. But the warmth was an illusion. In recent years, Mark had become distant, his temper short, his focus always elsewhere. He worked constantly, or so he claimed. He had a secondary phone which he insisted was work only, that he guarded with intense secrecy. I had tried to confront him once gently about the phone. "Mark, why does the work phone lock every time you step away? And why is the bill under a separate P.O. box?" He had exploded, his face darkening. "It's proprietary information, Sarah. You have no idea what I handle. Stop snooping. You trust me or you don't." I had backed down, afraid of the confrontation, afraid of losing the stability that was the last thread of our marriage. I had convinced myself that his secrecy was tied to his stress, to the pressure of his job. Now, standing on the scorching asphalt, my stability was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of betrayal. I stood up, picked up my canvas bag, and began to walk, heading back the way we came. The sun was dipping low, casting long, purple shadows, and the air was beginning to cool, bringing with it the dry, earthy smell of the desert. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew with absolute certainty that I was walking away from Mark forever. My life was shattered, but I was still standing. I had walked for maybe an hour, the sound of the infrequent passing car roaring and then fading when I heard a slow, steady rumble behind me. It wasn't Mark's diesel engine. This was softer, older, like a small station wagon. I turned, shading my eyes against the lowering sun. A beat-up, dark blue station wagon, dusty and loaded down with boxes, was pulling slowly onto the shoulder near me. The window rolled down, revealing a woman older than me, maybe late 60s, with kind eyes and a head full of tightly coiled silver hair. "Honey," she called out, her voice a deep, musical drawl. "You look about as lost as a church mouse in a liquor cabinet. What on earth are you doing out here?" The woman in the dark blue station wagon introduced herself as Evelyn. She didn't press for details. She simply saw a woman in distress on a deserted highway and acted. That simple humanity, following Mark's cold brutality, felt like a sudden, warm flood. "Don't worry about explaining right now, dear," Evelyn said, leaning across the passenger seat to push boxes aside. "You just get in here. We'll find the next town, and we'll figure out what comes next." I hesitated for only a second, the fear of the unknown battling with the clear and present danger of staying put. I opened the heavy passenger door, slid onto the worn vinyl seat, and pulled my canvas bag in beside me. The car smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paperbacks. "Thank you," I managed, the word feeling too small for the relief I felt. "Nonsense," Evelyn replied, pulling smoothly back onto the highway. Now, where was Mark headed? "We're heading toward the last services before the canyon." I told her we were headed toward Phoenix, towards his sister, Carol. As I spoke Mark's name, the bitterness was sharp in my throat. Evelyn was heading to her daughter's place near a small town called Willow Creek, about 20 miles further up the highway. The sun finally sank, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. In the dark, the small glow of the dashboard lights made the confines of the old station wagon feel like a sanctuary. It was during that drive, as the adrenaline slowly ebbed, that the full, cold realization of the truth struck me, not just about Mark's anger, but about his betrayal. "You know, Sarah," Evelyn said softly, breaking a long silence, "a man who leaves you on the side of a road without your phone or money isn't just angry, he's finished with you, and he doesn't care who knows it. He used to be better," I whispered, the first admission of failure. "He used to be kind." "They always are at the start," Evelyn sighed. "The kindness is just a costume until they've secured the asset. Then the real man comes out." I leaned my head against the window, watching the endless dark road spooling out ahead of us. I thought about Mark's secondary phone again, the one with the separate billing address. I thought about the hours he spent locked in his study, supposedly on conference calls, and the sudden trips to places I knew nothing about. The simple act of abandonment crystallized every previous doubt. He hadn't just thrown me out of the car, he had thrown me out of his life because he already had another one. We finally reached a small, blinking motel sign just outside Willow Creek. Evelyn insisted on paying for my room and buying me a cheap burner phone and a charger from the motel office. "You call someone safe tonight," she instructed, handing me the key. "A friend, a lawyer, a grown child. You don't call Mark. You don't tell him where you are. Your silence is your strength now, dear." I called my friend Linda, who was horrified. Linda immediately offered to drive the 6 hours to come get me, but I stopped her. "No, Linda, not yet. I need a couple of days to think. I need to figure out what I'm walking back into legally. I need to be smart." I needed to know why Mark had finally severed the tie so completely. It wasn't just a fight. It was a premeditated termination. The next morning, I used the motel's slow Wi-Fi to do what I had always been afraid to do. Search Mark's name, search his company, and search the location of the P.O. box on his secondary phone bill. The first search on his P.O. box address led me to a small, private mail service in a different state, not Arizona, but Nevada. Why would his work require a P.O. box 3 states away? Then, the true tremor hit. I searched Mark's company press releases. Mark, the regional manager, had been quietly promoted 2 months ago to vice president of acquisitions. This was news to me. He hadn't told me about the promotion, the raise, or the massive stock options that came with it. Why the secrecy? A promotion that large would have been a cause for celebration, not concealment. I then did the inevitable. I searched his name, Mark Peterson, alongside the P.O. box state, Nevada, and the keyword marriage. The results were filtered through public records. There was no new marriage, but there was something equally shocking. A certificate of engagement filed 3 months ago in Clark County, Nevada. The names were Mark Peterson and a woman named Carla Vance. My hands started to shake. I stared at the screen, reading the document several times, but the names were clear. Mark had not just kept a new job secret. He had been actively planning a new life, securing a new asset, and he had been using that work phone to build it. The abandonment on the highway was just the final, ugly step of erasing the old life before officially stepping into the new one. My shock wasn't loud. It was a cold, hard stone settling in my chest. The man who had been my husband for 19 years was a calculated fraud. Then, a sudden realization made me freeze. Carla Vance. I kept repeating the name. Why did it sound familiar? I searched the name again, adding the term construction firm and Phoenix. The profile that appeared wasn't Mark's secretary or a colleague. It was the CEO of a rival, smaller construction firm that Mark had been involved in buying out 2 years prior. Mark had handled the acquisition. I closed the laptop, the screen reflecting my face, pale, stunned, but now hardening with a fierce, cold focus. Mark hadn't just moved on. He was trying to combine 2 lives and 2 companies, likely using our joint resources to do it, all while keeping me completely in the dark. I needed help, and the only person I knew within 100 miles was Evelyn, the kind stranger, but I had to tell her the truth first. I found Evelyn near the motel laundry room, folding a stack of clothes. "Evelyn," I said, my voice steady despite the seismic shift in my world. "I need to talk to you. I think Mark didn't just abandon me. I think he was trying to erase me before he married someone else." Evelyn stopped folding, set the warm clothes down, and looked at me with those knowing eyes. "Tell me everything, dear." I told Evelyn everything, sitting there on the edge of the cheap motel bed, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I laid out the evidence, the sealed secondary phone, the P.O. box in Nevada, the unexplained promotion, and finally the certificate of engagement to Carla Vance, the CEO of the rival firm. Evelyn listened without interruption, her face thoughtful, occasionally running a calming hand over my knee. When I finished, the silence was heavy, but no longer shocking. "Sarah," Evelyn said, her voice low and firm. "That wasn't abandonment, that was an operational cleanup. He wasn't just planning to marry her, he was merging their companies and eliminating the old liabilities, which was you. He thought leaving you stranded and penniless would force you to quietly disappear." "But why Carla Vance?" I asked, my voice cracking. "She's wealthy. She has everything. Why would Mark risk everything for her?" Evelyn leaned forward and her eyes held a spark of fire I hadn't seen before. "Because she has power and money that he needs to climb higher. Mark didn't want a wife, dear. He wanted a ladder. And you, Sarah, were just too comfortable and too honest for the next rung." Then, a realization washed over Evelyn's face, and her kind eyes narrowed with sudden, intense clarity. She paused, looking down at her hands. "Mark Peterson," she repeated, tasting the name. "Small construction firm acquisitions. Nevada filings? Sarah, tell me, did this Mark Peterson ever talk about an investment property in Palm Springs about 10 years ago? Something about a duplex that failed before it launched?" I nodded slowly, confused. "Yes, it was the worst period of our marriage. He lost a huge chunk of our savings, our down payment for the new house, on a duplex investment that collapsed. He said the partner was a disaster." "Why?" Evelyn took a deep breath. She looked straight at me, and her composure was suddenly gone, replaced by a deep, weary anger. "Because that disaster wasn't a partner, Sarah. That disaster was me." The air left my lungs. The buzzing of the fluorescent light suddenly seemed deafening. I stared at the woman who had saved me from the side of the road, the kind, compassionate stranger, and realized she was a ghost from my own marriage's past. You're Evelyn Vance," I stammered, putting the names together. "Carla Vance's older sister." "The CEO's sister?" "No, dear," Evelyn corrected, a sharp edge to her voice. "I am Evelyn Hayes, but 10 years ago I was Evelyn Peterson. Mark and I were engaged. He convinced me to sink every cent of my life savings, my inheritance from my mother, into that duplex development in Palm Springs right before we were supposed to get married." She pulled out her wallet, removed a frayed, folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table. It was a faded certificate of engagement, dated 11 years ago. The name on the document, Mark Peterson and Evelyn Hayes. "He didn't lose the money, Sarah," Evelyn whispered, tears welling in her eyes for the first time. "He took it. He liquidated my investment, claimed the whole project failed because I didn't pull the final trigger, broke off our engagement, and left me with crippling legal debt that nearly ruined me. He used that money to establish the capital he needed to climb into his current firm. The disastrous partner he blamed was a lie. The truth was a heavy, cold weight. Mark was not just an unfaithful husband, he was a serial financial predator. He targeted women who had assets, used those assets to leverage his career, and then discarded them when they became a liability. He used your inheritance, then he used my savings for his promotion, I realized, the connection snapping into sharp, terrifying focus. He's doing the same thing to Carla now. He's marrying the company, not the woman. Evelyn nodded grimly. And once he has full control, Carla will be the next collateral damage. He never loved anyone. He only loved the next acquisition. A surge of energy coursed through me, a powerful mix of outrage and absolute clarity. The shock was replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. We weren't two women suffering from heartbreak. We were two victims holding pieces of the same evidence. Evelyn, I said, leaning over the table, my voice low and fierce. Mark thinks I'm stranded, crying, and helpless. He thinks I'll crawl back eventually, begging for scraps. He has no idea that the two women whose lives he tried to ruin are now sitting in a cheap motel room, looking at his legal documents. The strategy was simple, elegant, and devastating. We didn't need a confrontational showdown. We needed irrefutable proof of Mark's pattern of financial and emotional fraud. Our plan: gather the paper trail. Evelyn had all the old legal documentation detailing the Palm Springs financial collapse and her investment loss, the proof of his first betrayal. I had the new documents, the Nevada engagement certificate and evidence of his secret promotion. Target the weakness. Mark's entire scheme rested on two pillars: his reputation as a trustworthy executive and his ability to control Carla Vance's corporate assets. Exposing the truth would simultaneously dismantle both. The ultimate target: we wouldn't confront Mark. We would confront Carla Vance. We needed to show her Mark's pattern before she signed a marriage contract that likely included a prenup designed to give him control of her company. Evelyn, still recovering from the initial shock, was hesitant about confronting Carla, her younger sister. Carla won't listen to me, Sarah. Mark has already poisoned her against me. She sees him as her savior and me as a bitter failure. She will listen to me, I countered firmly. I am his wife, abandoned on the highway. I am a fresh, current victim, and I have the legal proof that he was actively planning to marry her while still married to me. That is bigamy, Evelyn. And that is a powerful weapon. We spent the rest of the night side by side, two women with a shared trauma, meticulously organizing the timeline of his deception, downloading and printing copies of every public document. We were no longer victims, we were co-conspirators in the pursuit of justice. We decided to leave the next morning. Our destination, Phoenix. We were going to stop the wedding and dismantle Mark's life, piece by calculated piece. Part 4 of the script, the action and the public consequence. ~1000 words, the old blue station wagon, loaded with Evelyn's boxes and our combined legal evidence, became our command center. We drove for 4 hours, the silence between us replaced by the steady rhythm of planning. We were two former victims, now two analysts, focused on a single target. Our plan required precision and timing. We couldn't confront Mark directly. He would simply deny everything and try to leverage his legal control over our joint assets. We also couldn't just email Carla. She would dismiss Evelyn as a bitter ex-fiancée and me as a jealous wife. We need a neutral, professional setting, Evelyn reasoned. A place where the truth hits him where it hurts most, his reputation and his power. We decided the best approach was to contact Carla Vance's corporate attorney. As CEO, Carla would have a high-level legal counsel responsible for vetting any major personal or corporate merger, especially one involving a senior executive like Mark. I used the burner phone to call a private investigator friend of Linda's, who quickly located the name and office address for Carla Vance's corporate counsel, a woman named Ms. Davies, based in downtown Phoenix. We drove straight to the law office. We didn't have an appointment, but we didn't need one. We were armed with 2 decades of Mark's financial fraud. I am Mrs. Sarah Peterson, the legal wife of Mr. Mark Peterson, I told the receptionist firmly. This woman is Evelyn Hayes, Mr. Peterson's former fiancée. We possess irrefutable legal and financial evidence of bigamy, systematic financial fraud, and a pattern of asset stripping against multiple parties. This evidence directly impacts the pending merger between Mr. Peterson and Ms. Vance's company. This is an urgent legal matter for Ms. Vance's protection. The use of the words bigamy, financial fraud, and pending merger was the perfect combination of corporate and personal crisis. We were ushered into Ms. Davies' office within 15 minutes. Ms. Davies was all business, sharp, impeccably dressed, and instantly wary. We presented our case calmly. Evelyn showed her the documentation of the Palm Springs investment collapse from 10 years ago, complete with Mark's signed investment proposal, and Evelyn's canceled checks proving she funded the majority of the project, followed by Mark's subsequent legal maneuvering to claim the loss was hers. Then I laid out the more current evidence: the Nevada certificate of engagement to Carla Vance filed 3 months prior, the undisclosed executive promotion and stock options, and the proof that Mark had abandoned me penniless on the highway while rushing to meet Carla. "Ms. Davies," I concluded, sliding the documents across her mahogany desk, "Mark Peterson is a serial financial predator. He marries or becomes engaged to women of means, takes control of their assets under the guise of investment, and uses those funds to climb his own corporate ladder. My abandonment was the final act of clearing the deck before he took over Ms. Vance's company." Ms. Davies didn't speak for a long time. She reviewed the documents, her face hardening with professional recognition of a devastating case. "Thank you, ladies," she finally said, standing up. "I will handle this immediately. Ms. Vance will need to be informed before she makes any further commitments." The confrontation didn't happen in a courthouse or in the quiet privacy of our home. It happened in the most public, humiliating arena possible for Mark, his own corporate boardroom. 2 days later, Evelyn and I were having coffee in a small diner outside Phoenix when Linda called me from our hometown, her voice practically vibrating with news. "Sarah, you won't believe this. The news is everywhere. They are saying Mark was arrested at work this morning." I held the phone tight, my heart beating a steady, victorious rhythm. "Tell me everything, Linda." It turned out that Ms. Davies had acted swiftly and decisively. She presented the evidence to Carla Vance, who was initially heartbroken and skeptical but quickly outraged by the clear pattern of deceit. Carla, a businesswoman above all else, realized she was next in line to be defrauded. Carla did not confront Mark personally. Instead, she called an emergency board meeting, inviting the senior partners of her firm. Mark walked in, expecting a triumphant final merger discussion. Instead, he was met by Carla, Ms. Davies, and several uniformed police officers. Carla simply had Ms. Davies present the documentation: the Nevada engagement filing, the Palm Springs evidence, and the proof of his undisclosed assets, confirming his financial misconduct and potential bigamy charges. The public consequence was immediate and brutal. Mark was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, not just for domestic issues, but for corporate fraud and financial misconduct related to Evelyn's decade-old investment and his false representations during the merger talks with Carla. His massive promotion and stock options vanished instantly. His carefully constructed life of wealth and power imploded in a single, public moment. I never spoke to Mark again after the roadside abandonment. I didn't need to. The universe, aided by Evelyn and a savvy corporate lawyer, had delivered the verdict. Evelyn and I stayed together for another day, feeling the immense release of the tension we had shared. We weren't friends who met over coffee. We were women forged in the fire of the same lie. "You saved me, Sarah," Evelyn admitted, leaning against the counter of the motel room. "I spent 10 years thinking I was a failure, that I was the reason the duplex failed. You proved I wasn't crazy. You gave me back my integrity." "You saved me first, Evelyn," I replied, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "You picked up a stranger on the road and showed me that decency still exists. You showed me that Mark was a pattern, not a personal failing." We said our goodbyes that afternoon. Evelyn was driving on to start a new life with her daughter, now armed with the legal standing to pursue Mark for the decade-old fraud that ruined her. I called Linda, who immediately drove the 6 hours to Willow Creek. Sitting beside my trusted friend, I finally felt the tears come not of sadness, but of relief and exhaustion. I was safe. I was free. And I was going home to start the long, slow work of rebuilding a life that was finally, truly my own. The ride back with Linda was the longest period of peace I had experienced in years. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the familiar landscape of our home state rush toward us. I wasn't racing home to confront a monster. I was returning to reclaim a vacant property, my own life. Mark was, predictably, a mess. The corporate fraud investigation, stemming directly from the bigamy evidence presented by Ms. Davies, had escalated quickly. The shame was public, and his career was over. His attempts to contact me were pathetic, emails pleading for forgiveness, voicemail messages full of legal threats interspersed with desperate apologies. I didn't answer a single one. Following Evelyn's advice, I had Linda hire a strong divorce attorney specializing in complex financial separations. Given the documented pattern of fraud and the public record of his misconduct, the divorce was quick, clean, and decisively in my favor. I received the equity from our home and a substantial portion of his vested assets, ensuring my financial future was secure. Mark was left facing bankruptcy and the legal consequences of his years of deceit. The physical house felt different when I returned. It was no longer a stage for his performance. It was simply walls and wood. The first thing I did was take all the framed photos of Mark and me down. I didn't smash them or burn them. I carefully placed them in a box, a clean, neutral gesture toward history. The memory deserved respect, even if the man did not. The true healing began not in the legal victories, but in the small, quiet acts of rediscovering myself. I realized I hadn't painted a wall or bought a piece of furniture that wasn't approved by Mark's stringent taste in over a decade. He had favored muted grays and stark modern lines. I hated them. My first act of personal rebellion was painting my entire living room a warm, sun-drenched terracotta orange, the color of the Arizona sunset I had watched the night Evelyn saved me. I also restarted my graphic design business with renewed passion. Before, I always kept my invoicing small so as not to overshadow Mark's career. Now, I pushed hard, took on large clients, and watched my own financial stability grow exponentially. It was incredibly empowering to know that every dollar I earned was mine, earned with honesty and integrity. The biggest step in my healing was reaching out to Carla Vance. It was unexpected but necessary. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sent her a short, professional email. Dear Carla, I hope this finds you well. I want you to know that I never wished you harm. I know you were collateral damage in Mark's game. I also know that you saved both Evelyn and me from further legal and financial ruin by acting decisively. I thank you for your courage. Sarah Peterson. Carla replied a week later. Her response was equally brief and deeply honest. Sarah, I was a fool, blinded by ambition and manipulation. I have spent the last 6 months untangling his mess from my company. I appreciate your grace. I especially appreciate Evelyn. If there is ever anything you need, please let me know. You showed me what true courage looks like. Carla Vance. That exchange was the final emotional closure I needed. It confirmed that the consequence Mark faced was earned, and that his pattern of deceit was fully broken. We, the women he tried to victimize, had ended his career and saved each other. I began volunteering at a local women's shelter, using my business skills to help women who were rebuilding their lives after similar financial and emotional abuse. I shared my story selectively, focusing not on the cheating, but on the strategy. I taught them to gather evidence, to find the paper trail, and to remember that their silence was a weapon, not a weakness. I thought often of Evelyn and that fateful night on the highway. I realized that Mark's act of cruelty, kicking me out of the car and telling me to do whatever you want, was the greatest gift he ever gave me. He stripped me of every illusion, forcing me to rely on the kindness of a stranger and, ultimately, on my own strength. He gave me the freedom to do exactly what I wanted, live a life without him. The road I was stranded on wasn't an end, it was the starting line. Closing/audience connection, ~300 words, my story isn't about winning a divorce or getting revenge, it's about dignity as your greatest asset. Mark thought he was clever. He built his entire life on lies, using his promotion as a shield and his secondary phone as his secret weapon. But what he didn't count on was the strength of 2 women, one he tried to ruin 10 years ago and one he tried to delete yesterday, working together. I had to be broken down to 0, abandoned by the man who vowed to protect me, to finally see the truth. The man you marry is sometimes just a mask, and eventually, the mask slips. If there is a lesson in my story, it is this. When the people closest to you try to minimize your worth, when they treat you as disposable, that is the very moment you must realize you are indestructible. Do not crawl back. Do not beg. Gather your evidence, find your Evelyn, and act with strategic silence. The most powerful thing you can do when someone throws you away is to build something beautiful with the pieces and never look back. Tell me, my dear friends, if you were Sarah, would you have sought justice through a lawyer, or would you have driven away in that blue station wagon and never looked back? Share your thoughts and wisdom in the comments below. And if this story resonated with your own journey of finding strength, please subscribe and join me for the next truth. Even after the legal papers were finalized and Mark's disgrace was old news, the lingering trauma of betrayal had its own schedule. It didn't disappear with the signing of a document. It surfaced in quiet moments, like the sudden, irrational fear when my car ran low on gas, or the instinct to check my financial accounts 3 times a day. Healing, I learned, was less a single event and more a prolonged, diligent maintenance schedule. I spent the next year systematically removing the emotional residue of the marriage. This meant changing my social dynamics. I realized Mark hadn't just controlled my finances, he had subtly dictated our friendships, favoring people who validated his ego and dismissing anyone who genuinely challenged him. I let those superficial ties fade away and intentionally rebuilt my inner circle around people like Linda and the women I met volunteering. Linda, bless her loyal heart, was a steady, grounding force. She never sensationalized the story, she simply celebrated my sanity. One afternoon, while we were painting the guest bedroom, a deep, calming blue I called Truth, Linda made a profound observation. "You know, Sarah," she said, carefully taping the trim, "Mark didn't just try to steal your money. He stole your time. He stole all the years you spent worrying about his mood, policing his secrets, and shrinking your dreams to fit his small ambition. That's the real theft." She was right. The deepest wound wasn't the financial loss. It was the realization that I had wasted my energy maintaining an illusion for a man who didn't respect me. I decided to reclaim that stolen time, not by rushing, but by savoring the small, ordinary joys Mark had always hurried through. I started taking long, unhurried walks through the park, noticing the specific scent of pine needles after a rain, a simple pleasure Mark would have ruined by checking his work phone. I bought myself a beautiful, heavy, leather-bound journal and began writing down everything, not for posterity, but for processing. I titled the first entry, "The Anatomy of a Lie." My relationship with my children also shifted beautifully. They had watched my silent suffering for years, and now they watched my fierce, dignified reclaiming. They were proud of my strength. My son, David, once told me, "Mom, I stopped respecting Dad years ago." But seeing how you handled the exit, the strategic silence, the clarity that taught me more about integrity than he ever could. That was the true redemption, earning the respect of my children not through suffering, but through empowerment. The professional success I found with my graphic design business was also central to my healing. I moved my office from the spare bedroom, where Mark's presence still lingered, to a small, brightly lit studio downtown. I named my company Phoenix Design, a deliberate nod to rising from the ashes of betrayal, but also a quiet thank you to the city where Evelyn and I dismantled Mark's empire. I developed a specialty in rebranding companies run by women who were starting over or pivoting their careers. It was deeply satisfying work, helping other women create new visual identities that reflected their newfound confidence. Every logo I designed felt like a small act of solidarity. About a year and a half after the divorce, I received an unexpected email. It was from Evelyn. "Dear Sarah, I'm writing from Palm Springs. I won. The judge ruled in my favor. Mark has been ordered to pay back the full amount of my original investment, plus interest and legal fees. The court agreed with our assessment. It was a calculated fraud. I bought a small duplex here. It's the duplex he promised me 10 years ago, but this time, it's mine, secured by my own legal fight. I'm calling the garden shed the Evelyn and Sarah War Room. Thank you, my dear, truly. Thank you for showing me how to fight, and thank you for showing me that justice, though slow, is absolute. Evelyn." Reading that email, I finally felt the last knot of tension unravel in my shoulders. Evelyn had her closure, and her victory was tied to mine. Mark's pattern was officially broken, documented by 2 separate court rulings in 2 separate states. I didn't dwell on Mark's fate. I heard whispers. He was living in a rental apartment, struggling to find high-level work, his professional reputation permanently stained by the fraud charges. He had tried to salvage things with Carla Vance, but she too had cut him out completely. A CEO who learned the hard way that a man who betrays his wife will surely betray his business partner. His misery was merely the natural consequence of his choices. I wished him no further ill will. He was simply irrelevant now. My energy was focused forward. My final act of letting go was selling the home where Mark and I had lived. It wasn't out of spite or pain, it was simply too large and too full of shadows. I bought a sunnier, smaller cottage by the lake, focused on simplicity and tranquility. The quiet of this new home was different from the silence of the highway. The quiet now wasn't emptiness, it was peace. It was the sound of my own thoughts, unbroken by lies or fear. It was the sound of a life being lived on its own terms, free, independent, and strong. The woman standing in that cottage, looking out at the calm water, was unrecognizable from the woman who had collapsed on the asphalt highway's shoulder. The new cottage by the lake, small as it was, became my laboratory of peace. It was here, watching the water reflect the changing sky, that I undertook the hardest work of all, excavating the lies I had told myself for 19 years. It's easy to blame the betrayer, but true healing requires facing your own complicity, not in the betrayal, but in the silence that allowed it to flourish. Why did I stay so long? Why did I allow myself to be dismissed as dramatic whenever I asked about the P.O. box or the secrecy? The answer lay in a quiet corner of my heart. I was addicted to the stability I thought Mark provided. I had traded my voice for the illusion of security. The big house, the nice cars, the corporate title, these were my golden handcuffs. Mark didn't have to control me with force. He controlled me with the threat of losing our comfortable status quo. I remember one night, sitting on the porch swing, the wood creaking softly, listening to the crickets. I picked up my old, dead cell phone, the one Mark had allowed me to use before the burner phone, and turned it over in my hand. I thought about the many times I had seen texts flash across his work phone that were clearly personal, clearly intimate. I would flinch, my stomach tightening, and then I would immediately put on my apron and start cooking his favorite meal, stuffing the evidence of my doubt down with every stir of the pot. That was the real betrayal, the betrayal of my own instinct. I began to appreciate the unique nature of my abandonment. Mark had intended to destroy me, but his cruelty was so absolute, leaving me with no money, no phone, no resources, that it became a moment of paradoxical clarity. When you have literally nothing left, you lose the fear of loss. The fear of losing the house, the savings, the reputation, it all vanishes when you are sitting on the dusty side of a highway, relying on the sheer grace of God and the kindness of a stranger. It was this stark, zero-sum moment that allowed me to connect so deeply with Evelyn. She hadn't just been left, she had been financially crippled and emotionally erased. And yet, she had picked herself up and kept moving. Her resilience was the blueprint I needed. I reached out to Evelyn again, not just to thank her, but to maintain the bond of shared wisdom. We started having bi-weekly video calls, separated by thousands of miles, but connected by the truth we shared. Evelyn, now basking in her regained financial independence in Palm Springs, offered a crucial insight into Mark's psyche one afternoon. "Mark is a man who needed an audience, Sarah," she observed, sipping her tea over the video call. "He wasn't happy unless he was the smartest, the richest, the most admired man in the room. He didn't love Carla Vance for her personality. He loved her company because it gave him a bigger room to perform in. His punishment wasn't the bankruptcy, dear. His punishment was the silence." She was right. Mark couldn't stand being irrelevant. His entire downfall, being let out of the boardroom in front of his colleagues, having his fraud made public, being ignored by his ex-wife and his ex-fiancée, stripped him of his greatest asset, his audience. He was now just a sad, middle-aged man with a ruined credit score, telling his pathetic story to empty rooms. My peace, conversely, was found in deliberately cultivating my own silence. I stopped trying to prove anything to the world. I stopped checking news about Mark. I focused entirely on the authenticity of my small, quiet life. I took the money I received from the divorce settlement and created a small foundation in my city, a grant program to help older women start their own businesses after divorce or career setbacks. I named it the 68 Project, after State Route 68, the place where I was abandoned and reborn. It wasn't a large foundation, but it was deeply meaningful. When I handed a check to a woman who had just left an abusive marriage, funding her new catering business or her online consulting firm, I saw my own journey reflected in her nervous but hopeful eyes. I wasn't just giving her money, I was giving her back her power, a power that starts with financial independence. I learned that revenge is a weak emotion compared to rebuilding. Revenge ties you forever to the person who wronged you, demanding you pay attention to their downfall. Rebuilding cuts the cord, focusing all your energy on the garden you are trying to grow. The memory of the highway, once a trauma, slowly transformed into a monument to my freedom. I sometimes drove past that highway sign, though I never stopped. When I saw that long, empty stretch of road, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the truck pulling away, gratitude for the brutal truth, and eternal gratitude for the stranger who stopped. I realized that every single thing Mark had tried to take, my stability, my dignity, my financial security, I had recovered and multiplied. The life he left me to fend for was, in the end, the most beautiful, honest life I had ever known. I had been thrown into the desert, but I had learned to grow my own garden there. And that, I knew, was a triumph more profound than any divorce settlement. The deep peace that settled over the lake cottage wasn't an empty space. It was a filled space, filled with my own quiet intentions. I spent months deliberately cultivating the concept of enoughness. Mark had taught me to strive for more, to constantly compare our assets and status with others. Now, I learned to be content with this. The smell of freshly brewed tea, the sound of the geese landing on the water, the feel of the cool, smooth stone beneath my bare feet on the porch. I realized that Mark's success was entirely dependent on other people's perception of him, whereas my healing was entirely dependent on my own perception of myself. I started a small, personal ritual every Sunday morning. I would walk down to the dock with 2 smooth, heavy stones. One stone represented the betrayal, the lie, the abandonment, the financial loss. The other stone represented the lesson, the strength, the strategic silence, the kindness of Evelyn. I would hold the betrayal stone for a moment, acknowledging the pain, the injustice, and the anger I had felt. I would then fling it far out into the deepest part of the lake, watching the ripples disappear. This wasn't forgiveness, it was release. I was giving the hurt to the water, letting it become part of the past, beyond my reach and therefore beyond my control. The second stone, the lesson, I would place carefully at the base of an old, strong oak tree near the water. This was the foundation of my new life. It was heavy, stable, and permanent. It was a reminder that the strongest structure is built not on easy promises, but on hard-won truths. The physical act of leaving Mark had been swift. The mental act took time and patience. It required retraining my brain to trust my own judgment again. For years, Mark had trained me to believe that my instincts were dramatic or overly emotional. Now, I listened to the tremor in my gut when a new client felt off, or when a decision felt rushed. I learned that instinct is intelligence accelerated. This quiet confidence extended to my relationship with my children. They knew I was rebuilding, and they gave me space and love in equal measure. They sometimes asked about their father, but their questions were laced with pity, not loyalty. "He called again, Mom," David would say softly. "He sounds tired. He asked if you ever got back that specific leather briefcase." "Tell him the lawyers handled all the personal effects, dear," I would reply, my voice even. "And David, you don't owe him emotional maintenance. He is an adult. You can move forward without carrying his regret." I ensured my children understood the difference between consequences and cruelty. Mark's life had collapsed because of his choices, not because of my actions. I had merely provided the legal mirror for his reflection. This teaching was crucial. Dignity is about letting the consequence be the lesson. I continued my work with the 68 Project, finding that the most profound healing comes from helping others navigate their own desert moments. I saw countless women who had the same look I once had, stunned, financially dependent, and drowning in self-doubt. I didn't give them advice, I gave them a strategy. "You are not fighting a lover, you are fighting a business opponent," I would counsel them. "Detach the emotion. Focus on the paper. The paper trail is your truth, your documentation of the lie. The paper never screams, it simply states the facts." One afternoon, I was at the coffee shop, meeting with a young woman, Maria, whom the 68 Project was funding. She was an artist whose husband had run off with their entire savings, leaving her with massive credit card debt in her name. "I just feel so small," Maria confessed, tears welling up. "Like I don't know who I am without his support." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "You are not small, Maria. You are simply in shock. The biggest thing you must reclaim is the knowledge that you were enough before him, and you are more than enough now. Your identity is not tied to your marital status or your bank balance. It is tied to the strength that brought you here today." I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, the same flicker Evelyn had sparked in mine on that roadside. It was the moment the victim chooses to become the warrior. I realized that every lie Mark told, every cruel act of abandonment, had equipped me to become a teacher of resilience. He had tried to break me, but he had inadvertently provided me with the most powerful education of my life. I was the master of the quiet strategy, the dignity of the controlled exit. My life was finally, truly, my own masterpiece. The most enduring lesson I carried from the asphalt to the lakeside cottage was the understanding of true freedom. Freedom wasn't the absence of responsibility, it was the absence of pretense. I finally allowed myself to date again, years after the divorce. But this time, my radar was different. I wasn't looking for status or security, I was looking for authenticity. The men I met were surprised by my bluntness. I didn't tolerate evasiveness or guarded phones. I had zero tolerance for shadows. The man who eventually became my steady companion, a kind, retired professor named James, was the exact antithesis of Mark. James was quiet, deeply honest, and profoundly boring by Mark's standards. He told the truth even when it was inconvenient. He was predictable in the best way. His life had no separate P.O. boxes, no locked phones, and no need for an audience. He simply was. With James, I learned that a healthy relationship doesn't require performance, it requires peace. It was a revelation to be with a man who celebrated my strength rather than feeling threatened by it, who saw my past trauma not as baggage, but as proof of my resilience. One evening, James and I were sitting on the porch swing, watching the last sliver of the moon over the lake. He asked me about the early days of my divorce, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a deep desire to understand my journey. That moment on the highway, he mused, it must have been terrifying. But you didn't just survive it, you became someone else, someone better. I became Sarah again, I told him, looking out at the dark water. Mark didn't just leave me, he left me to face the truth about myself. He abandoned the woman who was too afraid to ask tough questions, and the woman who returned was the one who knew how to find the answer. I explained to James the powerful symmetry of Evelyn's role. Evelyn, the ghost from Mark's past, became the anchor for my future. She was the walking, talking proof that Mark's betrayal was a pattern, not a singular tragic event directed solely at me. Her existence allowed me to detach the hurt from the personal and see it as a mechanical failure of his character. We were two sides of the same coin, tossed aside by the same conman, and together we shut down the operation. That was the key to my closure, understanding that I was never the target, I was just the asset. When you realize you were used, the heartbreak shifts into anger, and anger can be channeled into action. My work with the 68 Project grew, becoming the centerpiece of my legacy. We celebrated our 5-year anniversary recently, and many of the early recipients, women like Maria the artist, were now mentors, running successful businesses built on the ruins of their former marriages. It was a beautiful, powerful ecosystem of women lifting women. I looked at my life, the successful business, the calm cottage, the loving children, the respectful partner, and realized I had achieved the exact opposite of what Mark had intended. He meant to silence me, but I became a storyteller. He meant to bankrupt me, but I became financially independent. He meant to isolate me, but I built a community stronger than any marriage. The final moral of the story, the truth I share with every woman I mentor, is this: you must be your own emergency plan. Do not rely on the emotional honesty of a partner who has proven they cannot be trusted with the truth. Have your own savings, your own P.O. box, your own secret knowledge. Because when betrayal strikes, it is swift and absolute. Your ability to act, quickly and strategically, is the only thing that separates the victim from the victor. The keys Mark threw away that day, the keys to the truck, the house, and the stable life, they meant nothing. The key I found on that dusty highway, handed to me by the grace of Evelyn, was the key to my own sovereignty, and I never, ever let it go. I often think about the different roads I could have taken when I found myself standing on the highway. I could have succumbed to fear, crawled to a phone, and begged Mark to come back, accepting the role of the humiliated, dependent wife. But the brutality of his act shocked me into clarity. Sometimes, the most painful cruelty is the catalyst for the greatest growth. The man who tried to erase me became the reason I finally drew the sharpest, clearest lines in my life. I want you to ask yourself today, where in your life are you paying the price for the stability you think you need? And are you prepared to be your own Evelyn when the inevitable dust storm hits? Remember, dear friends, the strongest fortress you will ever build is within yourself. Thank you for allowing me to share my truth. If this story of strategic justice and healing resonated with you, please subscribe and share your wisdom in the comments below. Your support fuels this community of strength.